tires crunched over the soft morning dew on my front lawn. Again. I bolted out of the garage, coffee still in hand, as the metallic grey SUV rolled casually across the grass, leaving behind a trail of flattened green and muddy ruts. "Hey, you can't keep doing this," I shouted, but the driver didn't even glance my way. She just waved, like she was in a parade. Her tinted windows rolled up, her license plate catching the sun like a smug smirk as she pulled onto the street. That was the third time this week. Third. She knew exactly what she was doing. The SUV belonged to Karen, the self-declared enforcer of our HOA. Everyone on the block knew her. She was the type who reported you for leaving a garden hose in plain view or daring to plant sunflowers that were too cheerful for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The kind of person who treated her HOA badge like a sheriff's star in some dusty one-horse town. But this was personal. As I stood there, staring at the latest scars in my lawn, I realized something. Talking wouldn't fix this. Warnings wouldn't stop her. I'd tried polite. I'd tried stern. She treated every complaint like background noise. So I did what any reasonable, quietly simmering homeowner would do. I made a plan. You see, when someone keeps stomping over your boundaries, literally, you either roll over or you get creative. And the next time Karen drove across my lawn, let's just say she was met with a surprise she never saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind. Let me show you how an HOA Karen turned my peaceful front yard into a battleground, and how I turned the grass into a perfectly legal, totally satisfying trap. Before all the chaos, my neighborhood was the kind of place people wrote real estate dreams about. Tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved whether they knew your name or not. It was quiet, not the eerie, empty kind of quiet, but the comforting kind. The sound of sprinklers clicking in the morning, kids riding their bikes after school, wind chimes dancing in the breeze. It was the sort of place where time slowed down just enough to enjoy it. I'd lived there for 5 years, took pride in my home, especially the lawn. That patch of green was my weekend project, my little oasis. I aerated it every spring, cut it with precision, watered it just right. It wasn't flashy, just healthy and clean, a piece of order in a world that rarely offers it. I liked things simple, predictable, peaceful. The HOA was supposed to help preserve that peace. That's what they said anyway. Guidelines to keep everything looking neat, rules to make sure the community ran smoothly. I didn't love every policy, but I followed them. It was easier that way. Stay in line, keep your head down, enjoy your slice of suburbia. But peace doesn't last when someone decides the rules don't apply to them, especially when that someone happens to be the rule maker. And while I was trying to preserve the harmony of this little neighborhood, someone else had started carving her own path, right through my lawn. Her name was Karen. Of course it was. She didn't just belong to the HOA, she was the HOA. At least, that's how she carried herself. Clipboard always in hand, sunglasses that never came off, and a voice that could cut through stucco walls. She moved through the neighborhood like she was inspecting troops, peering at porch furniture, scowling at improperly coiled hoses, tapping notes into her phone like a detective building a case. The first time I met her, she wasn't interested in introducing herself. She was more concerned that my garbage bins were placed 2 inches past the acceptable boundary. Not 3, not 1, 2. She gave me a pamphlet about HOA violations and drove off before I could even ask her name. That was her way. Fast, firm, final. People tolerated her. Most avoided direct conflict, fearing citations or surprise HOA fines. I watched her circle the block like a hawk, looking for offenses. She had this expression, tight lips, nose tilted slightly upward, as if every flower bed was a personal insult unless she approved it. The first time she drove on my lawn, she said it was a necessary maneuver to avoid a trash can that someone had left too close to the curb. The second time, she didn't even bother explaining, just rolled over the corner of my grass like it was part of the street. No apology, no acknowledgement, just that same wave through her tinted window. From that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a one-time problem. Karen had found a shortcut she felt entitled to, and I had just become the unwilling host to her personal detour. It didn't stop there. Once she realized no one was going to stop her, not the HOA, not the city, and definitely not me, she made driving across my lawn part of her routine. Like clockwork, every Tuesday and Thursday morning, right around 8, the familiar hum of her SUV would echo down the street, and I'd brace myself. The tires would thud up over the curb and cut a perfect diagonal path through the edge of my grass, right where I had just reseeded a week before. And every time she'd pretend not to notice me standing in the driveway, mouth open, fists clenched. At first I tried to reason with her, calmly. I waited one morning by the mailbox and asked if she could please use the actual road like everyone else. She smiled, tight, fake, and said, "You really shouldn't leave your lawn that close to the curb. It's obstructive." I didn't even know how to respond to that. Obstructive. It was a lawn, not a barricade. Then came the notes. Not from her, but from the HOA. I started receiving citations for overgrown edges and untrimmed boundaries, as if the damage her tires caused was somehow my fault. I appealed. I took photos. I emailed. Nothing. The board denied every complaint, every bit of evidence. One of them even replied, "Please work with Karen directly to resolve neighborhood disputes peacefully." As if she were just another neighbor and not the one doling out the punishments in the first place. The lawn began to suffer. Deep grooves in the soil, patches where grass wouldn't grow anymore, muddy streaks that made the whole yard look like an afterthought. I tried putting up small reflectors to block the path. She knocked them down. I tried planting a row of decorative stones. She claimed it was a safety hazard and had them removed. Every attempt to protect my property was met with indifference or worse, retaliation. She had the HOA backing her every move, and she knew it. She'd smirk when she saw me outside, sip her iced coffee like this was some sort of game. And the worst part? No one else seemed willing to stand up to her. They just watched as my lawn became her driveway, and I became her personal joke. There's a special kind of frustration that comes when you realize the system designed to protect you is actually protecting the person causing you harm. That's what it felt like every time I picked up the phone, tried to file a complaint, and was met with the same hollow answers. The city said it was private property, and therefore not their jurisdiction. The police told me it wasn't a criminal matter unless there was damage exceeding a certain threshold. And the HOA, they doubled down, claimed Karen was acting within her discretionary authority as a board member. I began to feel like I was losing more than just patches of grass. I was losing my home, not physically, but emotionally. The place that used to bring me peace now made my stomach turn every time I heard tires outside. I'd find myself waking up early just to watch, to see if she'd do it again. And she always did. Neighbors started whispering, not about Karen, but about me. The guy with the lawn obsession. The guy who couldn't just let it go. One even suggested I plant something more durable, like gravel. It was surreal. She was the one trespassing, but somehow I had become the nuisance. Karen, meanwhile, basked in the power. She had her little kingdom, and I was the rebel who couldn't win. Every time I stood outside staring at the damage, I could feel her eyes on me from behind those dark SUV windows, watching, waiting for me to give up. And I almost did. Until one morning, as I stared at yet another fresh set of tire tracks, something clicked. If the rules wouldn't protect me, then maybe it was time I used them in my own way. Not with anger, not with threats, but with something she'd never see coming. That morning, as the sun broke through the clouds and lit up the mess she'd made, I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Karen with complaints or committees anymore. I was done playing fair in a game that had clearly been rigged from the start. If she wanted to treat my lawn like her personal shortcut, then I'd make it the most memorable shortcut she'd ever taken. I spent the next few days researching, not weapons, not spikes or anything reckless. I wanted something clever, legal, and satisfying. That's when I landed on the idea: water pressure sensors, the kind used in smart irrigation systems. With a few online orders and some light modifications, I could turn my lawn into a silent trap, one that would lie in wait beneath the surface, undetectable until triggered. I mapped out the exact tire path she took each time and marked the soil for pressure plates. Under the cover of darkness and a few carefully staged yard tools, I started the installation. It was delicate work. I had to bury the sensors just right, run the tubing, and connect it to a row of pop-up sprinklers. But not just any sprinklers. These were custom rigged with burst pressure. The second she drove over them, they'd launch geysers straight into the wheel wells and undercarriage. No damage, no violence. Just cold, wet justice. By the time I finished reseeding the grass and tamping it down, you couldn't tell a thing had changed. The lawn looked like any other on the block. But underneath, it was waiting, ready. And all I had to do was wait for Karen to do what she always did, just one more drive across my grass. The days that followed were the quiet kind that almost made me second-guess everything. Karen didn't show. Her SUV didn't appear. No new tire marks. The sensors remained untouched, the sprinklers dormant beneath the soil like coiled springs holding their breath. I started wondering if she had caught on, if maybe someone tipped her off, or worse, if she was simply done with me. That should have brought relief, but it didn't. Not after everything she'd done. I needed closure, a clean ending. I found myself checking the grass obsessively, brushing away leaves, inspecting the soil, making sure the trap stayed invisible. Every morning felt like opening night, and every afternoon ended in anticlimax. But the silence didn't last forever. On the fifth day, I saw it. The flash of that same metallic grey SUV easing around the corner, slow and deliberate like it always did. She paused in front of my driveway, as if to remind me who owned this street. Then, like clockwork, she angled the car toward my lawn. My heart pounded. I held my breath. The tires rolled up over the curb, inching over the exact path I had mapped. And then, she crossed the sensor line. There was a split second of stillness, as if the earth held its breath. And then the lawn erupted. Sprinklers burst to life in a synchronized blast, shooting jets of icy water straight into her wheels, under the chassis, up the doors. A geyser of justice, just as I'd planned. And that's when the real show began. The sky was clear that morning, bright and crisp, like nothing bad could possibly happen. It was trash day, the day Karen always made her rounds, weaving between bins like some suburban obstacle course champion. I stood inside behind the window, mug in hand, barely sipping as I watched the street. Part of me still thought she might veer off, choose a different route. Maybe she'd finally grown tired of the game. But there she was. Same time, same car. Same smug presence. She didn't hesitate. As her SUV reached my house, she casually swung the wheel, guiding her tires up and over the curb like she owned it. Her window was cracked slightly, music humming low from inside. I could see her sipping her coffee, completely at ease. And then it happened. The second her front wheels hit the second sensor, the ground responded with a vengeance. 4 high-pressure sprinklers exploded from the lawn with a violent hiss, launching icy jets straight into the SUV's undercarriage. Water slammed into the brake lines, sprayed the doors, and soaked the wheel wells. Her calm expression vanished in an instant. The car lurched, wipers suddenly flailing against the unexpected downpour. Karen slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The rear tires hit the third set of sensors. Another blast. The water created an instant mud pit beneath the tires, and the lawn, my poor beaten lawn, finally fought back. Her SUV spun slightly, kicking up thick clumps of grass and earth, before settling awkwardly at an angle. I stepped outside, casually, just to complete the scene. She jumped out of the car, hair and blouse soaked, phone in hand, eyes burning. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, pointing at the erupting sprinklers like they were war crimes. "Looks like the new irrigation system works just fine," I replied, sipping my coffee with the calm of a man who'd been planning this for weeks. The neighbors came out, one by one, some hiding smirks, others just pretending to pick up the paper, but everyone watching. And Karen, dripping and furious, stood on my now mud-streaked lawn, realizing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she'd crossed the wrong line. Karen didn't leave quietly. She stormed back into her car, slammed the door so hard it rattled, and wrestled with the gear shift while the tires spun helplessly in the soggy mud. It took her 3 tries to reverse off my lawn, spraying more water and bits of grass into the street. When she finally managed to crawl her way back onto the pavement, she didn't drive off in shame. She drove off like a woman on a mission, tires screeching as if the road owed her something. Within hours, I got the call. It was the HOA. "We need to talk about your landscaping choices," the voice on the line said. I knew that tone, calm, clipped, the kind used when someone's trying to intimidate you without actually having any power. I asked if they were referring to my irrigation system. And yes, that's exactly what they meant. Apparently, Karen had already filed a formal complaint stating that I had booby-trapped the lawn and endangered public safety. I calmly replied that I'd simply installed a water-saving irrigation system designed to respond to pressure. Perfectly legal, fully documented, and nowhere in the HOA rules did it say sprinklers couldn't be used along the curbside. Silence followed. Then the representative cleared their throat and muttered something about further review. The best part? A few neighbors sent me quiet texts. About time someone stood up to her. Legendary. You deserve a medal. They'd seen it all. Karen's humiliation wasn't just satisfying, it was public. And no amount of HOA bluster could erase the fact that for once, she didn't win. She got soaked, literally and figuratively. And I, for the first time in months, felt like the grass beneath my feet finally belonged to me again. Over the next few days, something shifted in the neighborhood. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but you could feel it. People who once avoided eye contact started nodding at me during walks. One guy even gave me a slow clap when I stepped out to check the mail. Word had spread, not just about the incident, but about the fact that someone had finally stood up to Karen. And more importantly, gotten away with it. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't taking it well. She doubled down at first, threatening lawsuits, sending out furious HOA bulletins filled with vague warnings about property sabotage and community violations. But this time, people didn't rally behind her. They started questioning things. Old grievances resurfaced. Citations she handed out over mailbox colors and garden gnomes suddenly didn't seem so justified. Then came the HOA emergency meeting, a special session, as they called it. The turnout was massive. Homeowners who hadn't shown up to a meeting in years were there, some just to watch, others to finally have their say. People shared stories, years of petty fines, unfair inspections, backhanded threats, all tied back to Karen. By the end of the night, there was a vote, simple and final. Karen was removed from her position, no ceremony, no thank you. Just a stunned silence as she gathered her binder and walked out, her power stripped away like peeling paint. A few days later, someone from the board asked if I wanted to take her place. I smiled, and politely declined. I didn't want control. I just wanted peace. And finally, it felt like I had it. Not just for me, but for the whole block. Karen's reign was over. And my lawn? It never looked better. In the weeks that followed, I reseeded the lawn and smoothed out the mud scars left behind by her final drive. The grass grew back quickly, stronger, greener, like it knew it had won something. Neighbors started complimenting it again. Kids resumed playing near the sidewalk without their parents pulling them away in hushed warnings. The tension that had once quietly strangled the block had lifted. As for Karen, her SUV still drove by sometimes, but slower now, careful to stay between the lines like a student driver on their first day. She no longer waved. She didn't make eye contact. She was just another resident now, stripped of her authority, her fear factor reduced to nothing more than a damp memory. I left the sprinklers in place. Maybe it was symbolic, maybe it was practical. Either way, I liked knowing they were there. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Some boundaries matter, and if you ignore them long enough, even the quietest yard can find a voice. There's a certain peace in knowing justice can come with a splash instead of a scream. And every time I look out the window now, I don't see a battleground. I see my home, restored. Some people think standing your ground means shouting the loudest, fighting the hardest, or throwing the biggest punch. But sometimes, it just means finding a smarter way to protect what's yours, without lowering yourself to their level. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. I wanted peace. And oddly enough, that came in the form of a few strategically placed sprinkler heads and a well-timed burst of cold water. Karen thought she could bulldoze her way through life, that the rules she enforced didn't apply to her. But no one's untouchable. Not when a community decides enough is enough. Not when the very ground they walk or drive on finally pushes back. I learned something through all this. You don't always need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you fight arrogance with patience. You fight entitlement with creativity. And sometimes, justice doesn't come with a gavel. It comes with a soaked leather seat and a stalled SUV in the middle of your lawn. So if you ever find yourself up against someone who thinks they're above accountability, just remember, there's always a way. It may take time, it may take planning, but when the moment comes, let the grass speak for itself, loud, clear, and soaking wet.